Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about session 32. So let's get started. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and the light of the one infinite creator. We communicate now. Questioner. I have a little question I will throw in at this point from Jim. I will read it. The instrument's physical complex is now in the process of recovery from taking a chemical. She was ignorant of the opening that she was creating. How can each of the three of us present be more aware of how such openings may be created in our actions and thoughts? Is it possible that we could make such openings innocently, as we question in certain areas during these sessions? And then, what can we do to protect ourselves from distorting influences in general? Is there any ritual or meditation that we can use? I am Ra. Although we are in sympathy with the great desire to be of service exemplified by this question, our answer is limited by the distortion of the way of confusion. We shall say some general things which may be of service in this area. Firstly, when this instrument distorted its bodily complex towards low vital energy due to this occurrence, it was a recognizable substance which caused this. This was not a, shall we say, natural substance, nor was the mind-body-spirit complex enough aware of its distortion towards physical weakness. The natural ways of, shall we say, everyday existence in which the entity without the distortions caused by ingestion of strongly effective chemicals may be seen to be of an always appropriate nature. There are no mistakes, including the action of this instrument. Secondly, the means of protection against any negative or debilitating influence for those upon the positive path was demonstrated by this instrument to a very great degree. Consider, if you will, the potentials that this particular occurrence had for negative influences to enter the instrument. This instrument thought upon the Creator in its solitude and in actions with other self, continually praised and gave thanksgiving to the Creator for the experiences it was having. This in turn allowed this particular entity to radiate to the other self such energies as became a catalyst for an opening and strengthening of the other self's ability to function in a more positively polarized state. Thus we see protection being very simple. Give thanksgiving for each moment. See the self and the other self as creator. Open the heart. Always know the light and praise it. This is all the protection necessary. All right, so despite Don introducing this question as a little question that he's going to throw in from Jim, Ra comes back, and I feel like this might be, a counter to Don's presentation of the question being a little question. And Ra says, although we are in sympathy with the great desire to be of service exemplified by this question. Like Ra is saying, this is actually a great question. It shows how much Jim wants to serve, how seriously Jim is taking this contact, how much he wants to help Carla. Like this was actually a really good question from Jim. I don't know why Don was dismissive of it. Maybe just a little embarrassed asking Ra personal questions, but this was a good question by Jim. So let's take apart Ra's answer here. So firstly, Ra says that they have to be kind of vague because Jim's question was very specific. So, they can't just give specific rituals or meditations for them to do that would bring protection to the group. Ra really can't give them advice that will change the choices that they make in the future. That is an infringement upon free will. So Ra has to give them a little bit more general advice for them to sift through and put into its own place in their own life experience. So in Jim's question, he mentions that Carla was ignorant of the potential distortions that could be caused by this drug. And Ra affirms and contradicts that, says, she knew what she was taking, but what she didn't know was that her mind-body-spirit complex had these extreme distortions towards physical weakness. That was the lack in her awareness when she took this drug. And then to follow up with Jim's question is, what can she do in her daily experience to be more aware so that she doesn't make this type of mistake that creates problems in the contact? And Ra essentially says, she does a good job. Carla does a really good job overall. Yes, taking this drug was a bit of a lapse in her judgment, but the way that she lives every day is really pretty solid and pretty good. And then they also say that, when she took this drug, there was a giant window of opportunity for the negative entities. They are the ones who set up this for her. So they were waiting. They were watching and they were waiting. But when Carla took the drug, all she did was feel very grateful and very loving towards the creator and all other people. And as Ra mentions again here, her and Jim had a sexual energy transfer that opened up Jim's Blu-ray a little bit. And so, that's a boon to the experience. There was a net gain in positive polarity for the group from this experience. So, yeah, Ra's saying, on the spectrum of all the potentials that could have, the potential outcomes of Carla taking this LSD, her being sick for a few months was like the best potential outcome. So many other terrible things could have happened to their polarity, to the harmony of the group, to the contact, but Carla was able to focus her experiences on the creator, giving lots of thanksgiving. And so, this part here at the end, I think, is very key and important. It's easy to overlook, but Ross says, thus we see protection being very simple. Give thanksgiving for each moment. See the self and the other self as creator. Open the heart. Always know the light and praise it. This is all the protection necessary. So the more we cultivate a default attitude of gratitude for all of our experiences, good and bad, just recognizing the gratitude within us as a portion of the creator that gets to have this kind of experience. Again, good or bad, whatever happens, if you can respond with gratitude on some level, that is a huge protection against any sort of negative greetings, negative attacks, these types of things. Gratitude is a very powerful vibrational state. There have even been studies done on gratitude that show if someone is in a very acute, heightened state of gratitude for something that has happened recently in their lives, something that was very lucky, something that they really needed or wanted or been looking forward to for a long time, if they're in this state of gratitude, that it's hard to get them out of it. While you're feeling grateful for something, it's hard for anything else to alter how you feel. And like I said, I could say that's science. I'm sure it was one study that I've read about, but they have studied this. So again, if you can just think of the creator, be grateful to the creator, even in your lowest moments, this is so powerful and so transformative. And as we move further into the book, we will talk more about magic and how magic is a change in consciousness. So if you can take somebody from being sad to being happy, you've essentially performed magic. You've shifted their consciousness from sadness to happiness. Or if you can take someone from despair to gratitude, that's creating a change in consciousness. That's magic. And you can do that with yourself all the time. You can shift your emotional state into another emotional state. And of course, this requires the groundwork of meditation and mindfulness, really. But that's magic. Changing consciousness is magic, because what's going on in our consciousness, in our minds, is what ends up getting projected out into the reality. So if we can shift our consciousness to a higher vibration, then what is manifested in front of us upshifts into a higher vibration as well, which means all of the lower vibrational stuff has less access to the higher vibration that you go, obviously. So gratitude and recognizing the creator, those are the two most important things that can protect you. So 32.2, Dawn says, "Thank you very much. I will now continue with the material from Day Before Yesterday. Our subject is how sexual polarity acts as catalyst in evolution, and how to best make use of this catalyst. Going back to that material, I will fill in a few gaps that we possibly don't understand at this point too well. Can you tell me the difference between orange and yellow ray activation? I'm going to work up from red ray right on through the violet, and we covered red ray. So what's the difference between orange and yellow ray activation?" I am Ra. The orange ray is that influence or vibratory pattern wherein the mind, body, spirit expresses its power on an individual basis. Thus, power over individuals may be seen to be orange ray. This has been quite intense among your peoples on an individual basis. You may see in this ray the treating of other selves as non-entities, slaves, or chattel, thus giving other selves no status whatsoever. The yellow ray is a focal and very powerful ray and concerns the entity in relation to, shall we say, groups, societies, or large numbers of mind-body-spirit complexes. This yellow ray vibration is at the heart of bellicose actions in which one group of entities feel the necessity and right of dominating other groups of entities and bending their wills to the wills of the masters. The negative path, as you call it, uses a combination of the yellow and the orange ray in its polarization patterns. These rays, used in a dedicated fashion, will bring about a contact with intelligent infinity. The usual nature of sexual interaction, if one is yellow or orange in primary vibratory patterns, is one of blockage and then insatiable hunger due to the blockage. When there are two selves vibrating in this area, the potential for polarization through the sexual interaction is begun. One entity experiencing the pleasure of humiliation and slavery or bondage, the other experiencing the pleasure of mastery and control over another entity. In this way, a sexual energy transfer of a negative polarity is experienced. All right, so another pretty big answer here to unpack. We're talking about orange and yellow ray interaction and how that ends up being manifesting in sexual energy exchanges. So, orange ray is about our interpersonal interactions with other people. Your personal interactions with your mom, your kids, your partners, your boss, like these personal interactions where you have a personal relationship and there's a lot of potential to desire to possess other people, like you, or, desire to be possessed. Like if you think of a boss-employee relationship, on some level you desire your boss to possess you because you want this job. You don't want to have to find another job. You want to stay in this job. You don't want them to dismiss you and not want you anymore. And so a boss has all of these entities underneath them in an orange ray configuration where there's like this hierarchy between the two of them. Now it's kind of a slippery slope. It's the orange flows into the yellow. So the difference between orange and yellow is the yellow ray is more about the societal perception of ourselves. So your interactions with your boss can be yellow ray. They can be more yellow ray than orange ray. They can be completely yellow ray. You could have no personal relationship with your boss. It could just be an impersonal relationship, but there's still this hierarchy, and there's still this desire to perform at a level where your boss and your other coworkers see you as a valuable employee. Something like desiring to be seen as a valuable employee by the whole company or by all of society is a yellow ray distortion. Desiring for your boss to see you as a valuable employee personally and to validate that, that's more of an orange ray energy. I hope that makes sense. To put it in a sexual context, an orange ray relationship would be when two people are just completely obsessed with each other. Like romantic love is really an orange ray distortion. I've said that before, and I'm not aromantic. I'm asexual, but I'm not aromantic. I believe in romance. I think romance is a positive thing, but this desire where you're just so obsessed with somebody and you don't want to do anything but be in their presence, and you can't fathom them spending time with somebody else because you're just so jealous because you want to spend time with them. These are all very intense orange ray possession desires. And we can take it more of a negative spin where it's like you are actually controlling your partner. You're telling your partner, no, you can't hang out with other people, you have to hang out with me. And you police their Instagram and remove all people of the opposite sex that they're following. And these kinds of things would be a manifestation of like an orange ray in a relationship. Now, a yellow ray relationship is different. You can still have, orange ray stuff going on, really intense romantic stuff. But a yellow ray relationship is a lot more impersonal. It's a lot more about, okay, well, like an example would be like a trophy wife. someone who wants a partner that's a lot younger than them, who is objectively beautiful when people look at them. And that gives, not to be sexist or, create gender stereotypes, but, this is kind of falls to one. This example that I chose here. An older man gets a lot of social capital when he's got a young, beautiful woman on his arm. And he may not care about her at all. He only cares about how her appearance alters his appearance to other people. That's yellow ray. And there are lots and lots of yellow ray relationships out there where the partners don't even care about each other at all. Partners may even hate each other, but they're so invested in the social capital or even like the material capital that comes from being in a relationship. Like, the trophy wife is with her partner in a yellow ray configuration as well. A lot of the times, it can go. Obviously, there's an infinite potential, but in a basic general configuration, the trophy wife has chosen a rich husband because that helps her socially. That lets other people look at her with more social value in society. And then she also has the material value that comes from that. And so again, that's more of the yellow ray manifestation of interpersonal interaction in a relationship. So if we take it to the next step and we talk about how this plays out then in sexual expression, again, two orange ray entities are going to be obsessed with each other. They're going to want to possess each other, or they're going to have this dom-sub type of relationship where one person is the dominant partner, one person is the submissive partner, and the dominant partner controls and gives the orders, and the submissive partner willingly follows those orders, and it's like a codependency, right? Where they're so codependent upon each other that they're both willing to play these roles so that they are together. And then, that would end up being sexually like a lot, I think, where BDSM would fall is sort of an orange ray sexual interaction most of the time. Now, yellow ray Raw talks a lot about here, one group of entities feel the necessity and right of dominating other groups of entities and bending their wills to the wills of the masters. So in sexual regard, I think that's tricky to talk about. It's not fun to talk about, but I will say, like, the first thing that comes to my mind are people who have a strong racial preference. Like, let's say somebody has an Asian fetish because they see Asian women or men as weaker, more submissive, more willing to fulfill that role. And so again, they're not looking for a partner that they get along with on this interpersonal level. They're looking for a partner who fulfills the yellow ray social role of a wife, which then allows them to feel better in the yellow ray, right? So if you only are seeking out like one race of people, or you're rejecting a certain race of people, or you're seeking out a race of people or a certain type of person because you know that they're going to submit to you for one reason or another, that's more of a yellow ray interaction and sexually. Another rough example would be like someone who's obsessed and addicted to having sex with prostitutes. Like, the prostitute relationship is very simple and easy. It's just an exchange. But they see this class of people, these sex workers, as objects, which is, again, what Ra's saying, is that groups of entities see other groups of entities as objects, essentially. There's the in-group and the out-group, and you could still have sexual attraction to the out-group, but you would never even, again, that orange ray interaction wouldn't happen because you wouldn't see them as a person. You see them as a non-person. Though there still might be levels of orange ray that develop a type of possession, a type of desire to not see the person that you've possessed or conquered get possessed or conquered by somebody else. That would then move it more into the orange ray. So I hope this makes sense. I could really honestly talk about this a lot and rack my brain for more and more examples of how these things play out. Another example that just came to me, if we're talking about like the workplace, again, where there's already an inherent hierarchy. Sometimes there are people who are higher up on the hierarchy who consciously choose to court, seduce, date employees of theirs, people who are lower than them in the corporate hierarchy, because they know that there's this power struggle. And again, like, I guess you could look at Hollywood, and, you know, not everything's set up like Hollywood, but I think it's a trope that Hollywood is set up that way, where it's like, oh, okay, well, you're a young, beautiful actress, and I have lots of young, beautiful actresses in line for this role, and it's going to be whoever has sex with me who gets this role. And so then they're using that, again, that yellow ray hierarchy and that objectification of the outgroup. That's yellow ray. A movie studio producer definitely sees most actors and actresses as expendable, replaceable objects, toys that they can use like action figures in their play. You know what I'm saying? And that's the same thing a lot of times in a workplace, in a corporate hierarchy. The higher-ups see the lower people as expendable, as replaceable, as just, you know, a means to an end. But again, really the important component is that there's the desire to possess and the desire to be possessed. And Ra even takes it down to one entity experiencing the pleasure of humiliation and slavery or bondage, and the other experiencing the pleasure of mastery and control over another entity. So there's pleasure on both sides. And, you know, I think it's interesting that Ra points to that, the pleasure of humiliation and slavery or bondage. Like, obviously, there's pleasure there. There's sexual pleasure there. But, you know, just because something feels good doesn't mean it is good, right? Just because it makes our whole body feel pleasure doesn't mean it's good. That's one of the biggest traps of our reality, right? Like, figuring out that just because something feels good doesn't mean it is good for us. But it can feel good. Being a slave can feel good. Feeling like somebody's pet, essentially, let's say, in these types of situations, being taken care, like there's the aspect, of being taken care of not having to make your own decisions, of not having to think. A lot of people love that. A lot of people love being in that kind of role where they're just captive and don't have to exercise their free will, because then they're not responsible for their choices. So then the one last thing to comment here on this, well, you know, it's not the last thing, but the one thing I haven't commented on yet is how Ross says the usual nature of sexual interaction, if one is yellow or orange ray in primary vibratory patterns, is one of blockage and then insatiable hunger due to the blockage. So I really think that's an important key to recognizing if you have any blockages personally, if you're feeling this like insatiable desire towards a specific person, that would be orange ray. If you're feeling a strong desire towards a specific group of people, that would be more yellow ray, or a specific type of person. But that's the thing about the negative path and negative polarization and utilizing these lower chakras. You have to really build up all of the energy and blockages in the lower chakras to bypass the heart, to be able to get to the indigo ray without going through the heart and the throat. You have to really get those orange and yellow rays just jacked all the way up. So for a consciously polarizing negative adept, which I think most people who are having negative sexual energy transfers aren't, I'm sorry, I just wanted to add in here, I looked out my window and I just see the most beautiful hawk just perched on a branch. So I'm going to take a picture of him and then I'll post him with this. He came and visited us while we were talking about sexual energy transfers. All right, sorry about that. I do have to let the birdie messengers interrupt my work, but I was saying that most people who are engaging in what could be termed as negative sexual energy transfers are not doing so consciously. A conscious adept recognizes and understands what's going on in their own energy body and is consciously building up these blockages by choice. But a lot of people who are engaging in these energies without consciously polarizing negatively don't really, understand what's going on in these lower energy centers. They just feel this addiction, this strong desire. And again, negatively polarizing entities love the addiction, love that feeling of chasing the dragon. But it can be confusing if you don't know why that's happening. And as Ross said before, what's actually happening is spiritually you're seeking the green ray. spiritually, you're actually, that on some level on the other side of these orange and yellow ray energies, that there's a green ray energy transfer that is better spiritually for both people. And I don't mean that like because the positive path is better spiritually, even though I do believe that. What I mean is that in a negative energy transfer, only one person gets energy. One person takes energy from the other person, and then they end up with more energy, and the other person ends up with less energy. But with a green ray energy transfer, both entities end up with more. So the sexual energy transfer is actually objectively more powerful because there's more spiritual energy that is moved around through this exchange. And so the body is actually craving that green ray, powerful sexual energy transfer, mutually beneficial transfer, whereas the orange and yellow rays get stuck seeking pleasure of the flesh, as we would put it, as the Christian faith would put it, versus the pleasure of the spirit, seeking the creator through our interactions. So yeah, that insatiability of those orange and yellow ray blockages, I think, is a really key component to how the negative path snowballs. Because again, we almost have to be tricked into negatively polarizing, or at least wanting to negatively polarize. We have to have a bias built within us where we actually enjoy the pleasure of bondage. Without the veil, that's not possible. We can't do that. We can't harm ourselves and each other in those kinds of ways without being veiled from our connection to the creator. So these biases, this insatiability is, again, what is creating the potential to snowball negative polarity into a harvestable amount. Because ultimately the creator doesn't care how we polarize. The creator just wants us to polarize. Our logos has a bias towards kindness, as Ra says, and only 10% of beings from third density, essentially, roughly, are harvested into negative third density. So again, it's still a very small percentage, a small fraction, and a lot of them don't even make it to sixth density negative. They come back to the positive path. So these orange ray blockages creating this insatiable desire is an important component of what then creates the potential for negative polarization. And this is why it's so important on the positive path to balance the mind and the body so that you understand the things that your body's asking for, and then you can evaluate whether or not these things are truly beneficial or whether or not they've just become programmed as an addiction, as an expectation, as a chemical expectation. Like you wake up every morning, you have a cup of coffee, your body expects that. And so, again, all of these chemical inputs, our body can become trained to expect these things. And sex is no different, obviously, especially if you're doing it a lot. All right, so 32.3, Don says, from the material that you transmitted February 17th, you stated, in third ray, there are two possibilities. Firstly, if both vibrate in third ray, there will be a mutually strengthening energy transfer. What color is third ray in this material? I am Ra. The ray we were speaking of in that material should be properly the green ray or fourth ray. Questioner, so I should change that third to fourth? I am Ra. This is correct. Please continue to scan for errors having to do with numberings, as you call them, as this concept is foreign to us and we must translate, if you will, when using numbers. This is an ongoing weakness of this contact due to the difference between our ways and yours. Your aid is appreciated. So, interesting that we know this at this point already, but Ra just flat out says they struggle with numbers, which is strange because I think we think of numbers as objective. We use math to explain what's going on in the universe, but they obviously aren't. They don't know how to count in sixth density. But one thing Ra says in the future about this is that they see the red ray as fixed. There isn't really much you can do with the red ray as far as energy transfers between other people and how those blockages affect other people. So sometimes they will call the green ray the third ray because they aren't counting the red ray. That's why that one is the way it is. But they just struggle with numbers And it's strange then that they would then refer to the green ray as a numbered ray instead of just continuing to refer to it as the green ray. But they did, and Dawn caught it, and Dawn has fixed it. But again, everything that's numbered and the raw material should definitely be taken with a grain of salt. But the good news is that most things that are numbered like that aren't that important. Chakras, yes, they are, and I think with context clues, we can figure out any of those places. Basically all the places where Ra made that kind of mistake have been figured out. It's pretty obvious. But other things like time spans, time frames, specific years when something happened, not always exact, not always accurate or correct. And I just want to say, too, if you listened to session 31, I think it was session 31, where they said that, when I read it with what Ra meant. I'm pretty sure I just read fourth ray. I might have read green ray. But it was a long response, and, it's just easier sometimes to just fix it instead of explaining it as I'm going along. It's more confusing when you're listening to something, obviously. I know, I will just say another thing in my experience. I helped edit the LL Research audiobooks that they have on Audible right now. So I know that when Jim went through and did his script for reading them, he actually edited a lot of Dawn's questions so that they were more listenable, essentially. And I don't really do that. I read Dawn's questions as they are, which does make it a little bit less listenable. But I did notice a few times in the books where Jim had edited the questions and it really changed things too much. So I'd rather have more fidelity to what's actually going on and being said and has been said than try to fix it to be more understandable. Obviously in Jim's version of the books, he's not giving explanations. He's just reading them. I'm then breaking it down afterwards and making it more understandable in the context of the, Dawn stuttering and starting and stopping and here and there. So that might have been the only time I actually just fixed something without any notation or anything like that. Because, like I said, it was a really long response and it wasn't worth retaining the error. But this is my admittance to having done that. And in the future, I'll do better. I just think I forgot by the time I got done reading it, I think I forgot to comment that, that I had changed it. But Ra made a mistake, and now it's fixed. And I do think they do it again, though, with the third ray, referring to green ray as third ray. So 32.5, Dawn says, okay, thank you. I believe that for the time being, we've amply covered green ray. So I'm going to skip over green ray and go to blue ray. Could you tell me the difference that occurs between green and blue with the emphasis on blue ray? I am Ra. With the green ray transfer of energy, you now come to the great turning point sexually, as well as in each other mode of experience. The green ray may then be turned outward, the entity then giving rather than receiving. The first giving beyond green ray is the giving of acceptance or freedom, thus allowing the recipient of blue ray energy transfer the opportunity for a feeling of being accepted, thus freeing that other self to express itself to the giver of this ray. It will be noted that once green ray energy transfer has been achieved by two mind-body spirits in mating, the further rays are available without both entities having the necessity to progress equally. Thus, a blue ray vibrating entity or indigo ray vibrating entity whose other ray vibrations are clear may share that energy with the green ray other self, thus acting as catalyst for the continued learned teaching of other self. Until an other self reaches green ray, such energy transfers through the rays is not possible. Alright, so here again, Ross saying the green ray energy transfer is a great turning point, sexually as well as every other mode of experience. If you can begin to open your green ray, you can then move that into the blue ray, which is turning the green ray outward, which is giving rather than receiving, which is expressing an acceptance of an other self. And this allows then the other self to feel accepted and able to express themselves more genuinely. So if two entities are vibrating green ray, or if both entities are vibrating in at least green ray, and one of the entities is vibrating higher than green ray, then they can share that energy with their sexual partner through sexual energy transfer. That is really, I think, the most powerful aspect. And Ra, again, mentions that in the first question, because when Carla and Jim had sex, when Carla was on LSD, she was able to give him a blue ray energy transfer that opened up his blue ray and allowed him to feel more able to express himself in an honest and open way. And I know, a lot of people kind of lament about maybe their partner not being as spiritual as they are. And I'm not saying, to wield the sexual energy transfer in this way, but if your partner is at least green ray and you're having sex in these green ray arenas, if you're both open in the green ray when you have sex, then you can transfer the higher spiritual energies that you have personally been working on to your partner. And then they'll integrate it into their lives in whatever way is most useful for them. It might not be going and picking up the raw material, but it can still help them gain a little bit more awareness and in their own energy body and move the locus within them up a little higher. The blue ray is really powerful. Ross says it's rare in our culture because we don't put a lot of value on honesty. And so if you can have an honest and open relationship with your partner and a sexual relationship with your partner and a compassionate, obviously, and accepting relationship with your partner, then you can have higher energy transfers during sexual intercourse. But if, one person's vibrating in blue ray and the other person's vibrating in orange ray, the blue ray person cannot transfer blue ray energy to the orange ray person. You have to be at least in green ray to be able to access the upper chakras through a sexual energy transfer. Unless, of course, and that's positive, obviously. Green or negative energy transfers are going to be absent of the green ray, and there is potential to open the gateway to intelligent infinity this way without going through the blue and the green. And again, that is usually what we refer to as black magic, black sex magic, and I'm sure you're all aware that there is a large repository of now public documents where you can read more about how people are doing that in our society. So, 32.6, Dawn says, my next question had to do with indigo ray. Is there any difference between indigo and blue ray energy transfer? I am Ra. The indigo ray is the ray of, shall we say, awareness of the creator as self. Thus, one whose indigo ray vibrations have been activated can offer the energy transfer of creator to creator. This is the beginning of the sacramental nature of what you call your bisexual reproductive act. It is unique in bearing the allness, the wholeness, the unity in its offering to other self. So, if you are indigo ray activated, you can transfer that to your partner. And the indigo ray activation is firmly seated awareness of the self as creator, and being able then to radiate that to another self who is receptive to understanding that portion of themselves as well. And Ross says this is when the sexual energy transfer becomes sacramental, is when we work with the indigo ray in this energy. And Ross says everything that we do with our bodies can be elevated to sacramental. Everything can be done through the lens of the indigo ray, whether it's cleaning your toilet, washing the dishes, brushing your teeth. All of these things can be done with a recognition of the creator within the self and the creator within everything that it's interacting with in its bubble and however it's doing whatever it's doing. You can see yourself as the creator, cleaning another portion of the creator, the toilet. You're doing the chores with a sacramental bend. So again, just to reiterate, sexual energy transfer is a super powerful way for two entities to move and elevate energy between each other, if both entities are vibrating in at least green ray. Okay, so 32.7, Dawn asks, and then finally, the violet ray. What is the difference between violet ray and the others? I am Ra. The violet ray, just as the red ray, is constant in the sexual experience. Its experience by other self may be distorted or completely ignored or not apprehended by other self. However, the violet ray, being the sum and substance of the mind-body-spirit complex, surrounds and informs any action by a mind-body-spirit complex. Okay, so here, the function of the violet ray in the sexual experience. Ra is saying that, like the red ray, the violet ray is always in effect, essentially. So the red ray is where we're pulling in energy to have our experiences, and the violet ray is the sum total vibratory reading of any mind, body, spirit complex. So that is affecting everything you do, because that is just, that's who you are. Your violet ray is a representation of who you are moment by moment, vibrationally. So that is there in any sexual experience. Now, that doesn't mean that people are going to be aware of it, or especially aware of its potential, but it's there. And so, Ross says that opening the gateway to intelligent infinity is how we move then through to the violet ray. And so there's another step beyond just opening the indigo ray as far as activating your energy body. There is that further step of the violet ray and being able to do some sort of spiritual work within that violet ray. And then I'm not seventh density. I only have my little third density perspective with glimpses beyond. But my assumption is that when you access the violet ray, that's when you're actually doing like programming, like reprogramming of your experience. So I think that's something that most people would love to have access to. And it's just one of the things that, again, the sexual energy transfer helps with. If you and your partner are both able to be consciously aware of this potential, then you can access this potential via sexual energy transfer. So 32.8, Dawn says, do the energy transfers of this nature occur in 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th density? I mean, all of the rays? I am Ra. The rays, as you understand them, have such a different meaning in the next density and the next and so forth that we must answer your query in the negative. Energy transfers only take place in 4th, 5th, and 6th densities. These are still of what you would call a polarized nature. However, due to the ability of these densities to see the harmonies between individuals, these entities choose those mates which are harmonious, thus allowing constant transfer of energy in the propagation of the body complexes which each entity uses. The process is different in the 5th and 6th density than you may understand it. However, it is in these cases still based upon polarity. In the 7th density, there is not this particular energy exchange, as it is unnecessary to recycle body complexes. So, here Ra is saying that all of the densities through 6 have some type of sexual energy transfer, because the sexual energy transfer is apparently tied to reproduction of body complexes. And in the higher densities, we can really see each other's violet rays. We can see who is a harmonious partner, who is going to have the least amount of friction being in a relationship with them. And then we choose those partners. And then the pathway for sexual energy exchange is more open constantly. Ross says that if entities are seriously mated over a long period of time, that they can have sexual energy transfers without actually having sex or having orgasms. It becomes, the pathway is opened between the two of them, where they can just indulge in the beingness of the other and feel joy in that. And I'm sure a lot of people who are listening have experienced that in brief little windows with partners before, just feeling this totally open, almost orgasmic bliss without the orgasm, right? So in the higher densities, beings choose other entities where these pathways have very little friction, where the sexual energy exchange is basically constant. There's this constant refreshing of both bodies, balancing the polarity between them, essentially. Because one body's going to have more male energy, one body's going to have more female energy, and when you link up, you're able, again, to exchange in a way that both entities end up with more, where the sum is greater than its parts. So, 39.2, Dawn says, I'm assuming from what we have previously looked at, we have on Earth today, and we have had in the past, 4th, 5th, and 6th density wanderers. As they come into incarnation in the physical of this density for a period as a wanderer, what types of polarizations, with respect to these various rays, do they find affecting them? Can you tell me that? I am Ra. I believe I grasp the thrust of your query. Please ask further if this answer is not sufficient. Fourth density wanderers, of which there are not many, will tend to choose those entities which seem to be full of love or in need of love. There is the great possibility/probability of entities making errors in judgment due to the compassion with which other selves are viewed. The fifth density wanderer is one who is not tremendously affected by the stimulus of the various rays of other self, and in its own way offers itself when a need is seen. Such entities are not likely to engage in the, shall we say, custom of your peoples called marriage, and are very likely to feel an aversion to childbearing and child-raising due to the awareness of the impropriety of the planetary vibrations relative to the harmonious vibrations of the density of light. The sixth density, whose means of propagation you may liken to what you call fusion, is likely to refrain, to a great extent, from the bisexual reproductive programming of the bodily complex, and instead seek out those with whom the sexual energy transfer is of the complete fusion nature, insofar as this is possible in manifestation in third density. All right, so let's unpack this one. I think it's got good info in it as well. I will point out that I've never noticed before, but I'm not sure if it's intentional or not, but Ra makes a bit of a pun, because Dawn is asking about sexual energy transfers, and then Ra says, I believe I grasp the thrust of your query. Sorry, that just amused me this read through. But here they are saying that there are not very many fourth density wanderers, but those who do wander from fourth density, and now we have, more and more even newly fourth density entities in dual activated bodies. It's a much more modern phenomenon. There were only like 35,000 dual activated entities when Ra was talking to Dawn, but it's because we were just beginning this process of having dual activated bodies. I think, presume, guess that everyone who's being born right now is being born in dual activated bodies, and a good portion of them are early fourth density beings. Not to go off on irrelevant stuff, but it is relevant because if this description of fourth density resonates with you and you're a younger person, it's possible that you are one of the early fourth density entities who are incarnating to help the transition. Ross says that we have an influx of those who have just been harvested to fourth density, not on this planet, but on other planets, who have come here to help the transition because we don't have very many to harvest on this planet. So we don't have very many fourth density earthlings to populate the new fourth density Earth, so other beings from other planets are coming and have begun that process. So there are more fourth density entities on our planet than this response from Ra implies, but back then there just weren't that many. And the newly dual activated entities, Ra does not term as wanderers either. So fourth density wanderers are rare. Newly fourth density harvested entities who are being born in dual activated bodies are more and more common. So this fourth density description of having errors in judgment because of an overabundance of compassion in viewing other selves, that's, if that resonates with you, maybe in other parts of being dual activated, and maybe even coming from a different star system resonate with you, maybe you're fourth density. So fifth density, Ross says, are very much, they have their own mission, and that mission doesn't necessarily involve too much interaction with other selves. And fifth density wanderers are also pretty rare. They're not very common because Earth isn't really the best place. Being veiled isn't the best place to gain wisdom. It's wisdom is far coming while being veiled. It's much easier to gain wisdom in fifth density. But some fifth density positive beings do wander out of a desire for service. And here too, Ross says that fifth density wanderers don't really feel pulled to having children either, because they don't want to be responsible for taking care of a child on this vibratorily difficult planetary sphere, which is understandable. that was my previous motivations for not having a child. So I get that, but I have a child now, so gotta cope with that. So sixth density entities, sixth density wanderers, Ross says, and we talked about this yet in the previous session, that they refrain from bisexual reproductive programming of the body complex and instead seek out those with whom the sexual energy transfer is of the complete fusion nature insofar as this is possible in manifestation in third density. So sixth density wanderers aren't looking for physical gratification. They aren't seeking those pleasures of the flesh. They're looking for the spiritual connection that they know is there, that is a part of them because they've been in sixth density, they've experienced this fusion nature of bisexual reproduction, so they are going to intuitively seek out other sixth density entities who can also function on that level sexually. And I will add in here that there's always a lot of discussion about whether or not, maybe I've already discussed this, but there's a lot of discussion about, Ross says that one of the LL research group is a fifth density wanderer, and 2 are sixth density wanderers. And the fifth density wanderer, I think Ross says, is harvestable, but came back and incarnated with the other 2 because one of them was a beloved teacher. So based on this, and maybe a couple other things, but this I think pretty explicitly, I think the fifth density description describes Dawn, and the sixth density description describes Jim and Carla, because Dawn is unaffected by the stimulus of the various rays of other self, offers himself in his own way. Dawn did not want to get married, did not want kids. These were like the biggest places of contention between him and Carla. Carla wanted to be married, wanted to have kids, wanted that traditional life. Dawn wanted nothing to do with any of that. But Jim and Carla are over here having Blu-ray energy transfer sexually, and I'm assuming eventually, because this is at the beginning, we're still at the very beginning of their relationship. I'm sure they eventually worked themselves up to indigo ray energy transfers. So I'm pretty sure that's my opinion and assessment. Dawn, full of wisdom, full of ick for all things having to do with other selves. But Jim and Carla were able to come together to find each other and to have these sexual energy transfers that were in the realm of fusion. I also think another component of that is looking at how Dawn really struggled with integrating the raw material. He ultimately couldn't. He couldn't integrate all of this. But Carla and Jim did a pretty good job. And so I think that might also be a signifier of Dawn being of a lesser native vibrational awareness than Jim and Carla. But that's my tangent on that. It's this question in particular that makes me think, oh, well, the fifth density seems to be describing Dawn, and the sixth density seems to be describing Jim and Carla far more and pretty explicitly. But those are the ways that various wanderers express sexual interaction. So 3210, Dawn says, can you expand a little bit on what you mean by complete fusion nature? I am Ra. The entire creation is of the one creator. Thus, the division of sexual activity into simply that of the bodily complex is an artificial division, all things thusly being seen as sexual equally, the mind, the body, and the spirit, all of which are a part of the polarity of the entity. Thus, sexual fusion may be seen with or without what you may call sexual intercourse, to be the complete melding of the mind, the body, and the spirit in what feels to be a constant orgasm, shall we say, of joy and delight, each in the other's beingness. So, again, that's what's going on in sixth density by default. They're just having fusion sexual energy transfers all the time. But we can get glimpses of that here in third density. And much later on, Ra encourages us to do so. Ra refers to it as seeking the jewel. Ra says that it's this jewel of having this type of sexual intimacy is dearly bought, but it is worth the price. So it takes a lot of work to have an interpersonal relationship that can reach these states of harmonic fusion, but the work is worth it. If you found a partner that you really want to do that work with, all the work, all the sacrifice will bring you more than what you've lost. So 3211, Dawn says, would then many wanderers of the higher densities have considerable problems with respect to incarnation in third density because of this different orientation? I am Ra. The probability of such problems, as you call them, due to sixth density incarnating in third is rather large. It is not necessarily a problem if you would call it thusly. It depends upon the unique orientation of each mind-body-spirit complex having this situation or placement of vibratory relativities. So, I read this one again. I think this one's actually kind of relevant to session 31 about homosexuality, and how I mentioned that I do think a lot of homosexuals might be wanderers, might be sixth density wanderers. Here Ra is saying that the probability of such problems, sexual problems, due to sixth density incarnating in third is rather large. And they refer to, homosexuality as a distortion, relatively, in the context of things working, quote unquote, as they should be. It's a problem, but it seems like these types of problems are part of being a wanderer. Like, integrating into this reality causes so many problems. So, Ra, I don't want to call it a problem. I'm just using language, but Ra even says it's not necessarily a problem if you call it thusly. Everyone has their own placement of vibratory relativities. And so I think then what happens is, with homosexuality, your placement of vibratory relativities becomes that you are attracted to the opposite gender manifestation of your inherent sexual polarity. Again, if you've been a female body far more than a male body, and then you incarnate in a male body, your spirit is still going to pull itself towards the female expression of self, which is desiring the male counterpart. And again, I'm just saying that because I think that explains the placement of vibratory relativities. These things get jumbled up. We come as wanderers with a certain idea of what it's going to look like, but Earth is messed up, to put it as kindly as possible. So things get really hard. And again, I really think like at this point in time, we're talking like 40 years out, I think more and more incarnating as a homosexual person or a trans person is actually a choice. I think people are incarnating for that experience, to see what that's like, how that manifests, how to express itself. Because again, I think more and more a lot of people who do find themselves in a homosexual orientation have felt that way from a very, very, very young age. Like, just knew very early on that there was a situation or placement of vibratory relativities that wasn't the norm. But again, I want to clarify because the language can be loaded here. I'm very much pro queerness. I think expressing the creator in all the ways possible is amazing. I don't think that you have to have polarized body complexes to have polarized sexual exchange. Obviously, I think queer people can still have sexual energy transfers. I think that's what it comes down to. It's like, oh, well, does it have to be a male body and a female body to have a sexual energy transfer? No. There has to be some polarity in that expression along the spectrum of male and female for there to be a transfer, because otherwise, what is there to transfer? But I think you put any two bodies together, there's going to be some sort of polarity between their male and female expression. So 32.12, Dawn says, can you give me an idea how the different colors? This is a difficult question to ask. I hardly have any words. What I'm trying to get at is how the different colors, I might say, originate as these functions, or the essence, you might say, of the origin of these colors as functions for these different expressions in consciousness. I don't know if this question is sufficient. I am Ra. This question is sufficiently clear for us to attempt an explanation of what, as you have observed, is not easily grasped material for the intellectual mind. The nature of vibration is such that it may be seen as having mathematically straight or narrow steps. These steps may be seen as having boundaries. Within each boundary, there are infinite gradations of vibration or color. However, as one approaches a boundary, an effort must be made to cross that boundary. These colors are a simplistic way of expressing the boundary divisions of your density. There is also the time-space analogy, which may be seen as the color itself in a modified aspect. All right, again, so difficult to grasp with the intellectual mind, but the densities have thresholds, and color is a very simple way of defining those thresholds between the densities, because you are just constantly following the upward spiral of light, but again, there are these thresholds that have to be crossed once you get to certain checkpoints, essentially. So those checkpoints are the different colors. And Ra also then mentions the time-space analogy, which may be seen as the color itself in a modified aspect. Ra talks about how crystals contain this energy. Crystals contain the energy of metaphysical light within them. So I think that might be what Ra's referring to there. Otherwise, I don't really know what Ra's referring to there. So 32.13, Dawn says, thank you. Is it possible for an entity in third density physical to vary widely across the entire band of colors, or is the entity pretty well zeroed in on one color? I am Ra. This will be the last full question of this working. Please restate for clarity. Questioner. I just meant, was it possible, say, for a green ray? When we're talking about green ray activation and energy transfers, is it possible for a green ray person who is primarily green ray activation to vary on both sides of green ray a large or a small amount in energy activation? Or does he stay primarily green ray? I am Ra. We grasped the newness of material requested by you. It was unclear, for we thought we had covered this material. The portion covered is this. The green ray activation is always vulnerable to the yellow or orange ray of possession, this being largely yellow ray, but often coming into orange ray. Fear of possession, desire for possession, fear of being possessed, desire to be possessed. These are the distortions which will cause the deactivation of green ray energy transfer. The new material is this. Once the green ray has been achieved, the ability of the entity to enter blue ray is immediate and is only awaiting the efforts of the individual. The indigo ray is opened only through considerable discipline and practice, largely having to do with acceptance of self, not only as the polarized and balanced self, but as the creator, as an entity of infinite worth. This will begin to activate the indigo ray. So, Dawn here is confused about how, if somebody, becomes activated in a certain ray, in a certain energy center, how solid that state of being is. Like, if you become green ray activated, do you stay green ray activated? And the answer is no. You can get to the top of the hill and you can fall back down. That's why it's such a tricky thing. You can cross that threshold and then get pulled back into the orange or yellow rays. And I think it's really important, a really good thing to meditate on is this fear of possession, desire for possession, fear of being possessed, desire to be possessed. In what ways do we choose these things? In what ways do we choose these energies? They can be very subtle and insidious in the ways that we give in to these desires and fears. And so those are the things that Ra says deactivate the green ray energy center. And obviously acceptance and compassion open the green ray energy transfer. And so here then Ra states that once the green ray is open, you can also go up. If you're in the green ray, you can go up or down as much as you want, really. It's your energy body. But when you're in the green ray, the more you open and crystallize the green ray, the more you have the potential to move into the blue ray. And then as you accept yourself and you balance yourself and you polarize yourself and you recognize the creator within yourself, then you open the indigo ray. And again, you can open the indigo ray and still go all the way back down to orange. Our energy bodies are always in flux. The catalyst is constant. The energy web of the planet is so intense that it does take, as Ross says, a lot of discipline, considerable discipline and practice to get to that indigo ray state of being, even just for those blips that we might be able to get there. So 3215, Dawn says, thank you. I am Ra. Do you have any brief queries before we close? Questioner. I think anything would be too long. I'll just ask if there's anything we can do to make the instrument more comfortable or make the contact better. I am Ra. All is well. We caution not only this instrument, but each, to look well to the vital energies necessary for non-depletion of the instrument and the contact level. You are most conscientious, my friends. We shall be with you. I leave you now in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. Go forth then, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one infinite Creator. Adonai. All right, so this answer from Ra is basically saying that it isn't just the instrument who needs to be vigilant about her vital energy levels, but Dawn and Jim also need to be diligent, because if they succumb to a state of lessened vital energy, then Carla is going to use her vital energy to step up and fill in those roles. You know what I'm saying? If like Dawn is having a bad day, if Dawn is feeling depressed or depleted in any way, Carla's going to step up and try to offer her energy to lift Dawn back up, right? And so what Ra's saying here is that Dawn and Jim, you need to take care of yourself so that the instrument isn't wasting her energy taking care of you, and then that would then deplete her energy and lessen the level of the contact. So, again, as Ross said before, everyone has to take care of themselves. Everyone has their own energy body to deal with, and it's easy when you're in, like a communal situation for each person for it to go in cycles. One person has a bad day, the other person steps up, another person, you go back and forth. One of you is sick, the other one takes care of you, the other one gets sick, you take care of them. But Carla is very weak. Carla has low native physical energy. Carla's vital energies are very easily depleted. So Ra is advising Dawn and Jim to not have any dependency on Carla's emotional labor or physical labor, essentially, to let her to try to deal with their stuff on their own so that they can uplift her, because she is kind of the crux of the energy of the contact. But obviously they all work together, and if one of them is feeling lesser, if Dawn or Jim is feeling lesser, then that's going to deplete Carla as well. So really this focus on Ra has to be very careful, because they don't want Dawn and Jim to put Carla on this pedestal and treat her like this goddess that they need to worship and wash her feet with their hair every day. They want there to be a balanced realization and understanding of the energetics of what is required to make this contact. And Carla is kind of the focal point. So they really do need to consider her widely in their decisions and choices and their modes of being. But again, they shouldn't put her up on some sort of pedestal or make her more important than themselves, essentially, because that would lead to its own distortions and decrease in vital energy if Dawn then leaves this session and goes moping and is like, oh, Ra doesn't want me to bug Carla about my problems, and if starts to feel bad about himself about it, then that's going to lead to its own problems. So Ra just says, as briefly and succinctly as possible, Dawn and Jim, take care of yourselves as best as you can so that your lack of energy, lack of stability doesn't become so obvious to Carla that she comes and tries to fix it. Because then she's going to be spending vital energy that she doesn't have on you when you can figure it out for yourself without her most of the time. So that's session 32. It's a pretty good session. There's a lot of really interesting, useful stuff. I feel like I say that every time. I'm sorry to be redundant like that, but I think especially too when you start at the beginning, you read it through. Some of the beginning sessions are kind of like, and Dawn in some sessions Dawn goes back and forth where it's like a good question and then a kind of transient personal question that's something that's his own personal desires. Because again, here I have a little question from Jim that I'll read, and Dawn's kind of being dismissive about Jim's question, but Dawn has asked so many questions about just things that he wanted to personally know or confirm from his own research and stuff. And so sometimes it's obviously more and more these sessions get better and better. I don't think there are really any duds going forward where it's just like every question is transient and there's very little to chew on, but this one's a really good articulation of introduction to sexual energy transfers, and I will put a link in the description for this one. I made an article on my Substack where I took all of the quotes and citations about sexual energy transfers that Ra and Dawn discuss, and I removed all the fluff. And in general, I don't like taking Ra citations out of context that much. But the sexual energy discussion, it's obvious that Dawn is asking out of obligation. Like, Dawn realizes that this is something that's important to Ra and that Ra wants to talk about, but it's not something that Dawn cares about at all. And it's also not something that Dawn has a lot of experience with. So sometimes Dawn asks questions that are kind of convoluted, or Ra has to explain something to Dawn in a way that's kind of convoluted. So really, a lot of it is just removing Dawn's commentary on the sexual energy transfer discussion, essentially. Obviously, I haven't edited anything. I've just kind of whittled down the citations that have really juicy advice, information, tangible things to work with. So I'll link that too, in case you are interested in learning more about sexual energy transfers. I feel like that document, I made it for my husband. But I decided that it might be useful to other people to have that available, to just kind of read it all at once, to kind of get it really expand the mind about these potentials and how this works. So I will link that below. And I will just say thank you to everybody. Of course, I am so grateful to all of you. I have had a hectic couple of weeks. I'm getting kind of behind, trying not to feel overwhelmed at staying caught up on this project. Genuinely doing my best. So I'm sorry for the times that there are long breaks between uploads. And I really wish I did have more time to focus and do this. But it does take a significant amount of focus, time, and energy. I like to sit down and go through one whole session and record it all at once. I usually do a lot of times edit it in chunks, because editing 20 minutes here, 45 minutes there, it's not as focused of a thing that I need to do, but I like staying within the session and doing that all at once when I read it. So anyway, no more griping about the problems, about the hurdles that I have to overcome. I'm really happy to do this project. I'm so grateful for everybody who listens and talks to me about it and gives me any feedback and just helps facilitate what we're doing here. Super, super grateful. And I'm super grateful to the creator for our beautiful creation. Thank you for sending a beautiful hawk to visit while we recorded this session. I also, pretty much the whole time I was recording, I had a herd of deer in my yard as well. I didn't mention them because they were here when I started. And they're not here anymore, but they were here most of the time. There were about a dozen deer that were just hanging out this morning. So thank you, creator, for all of the winks and nudges. And I look forward to session 33, which I will record ASAP.